American soldiers walked into the trenches of World War I armed with a weapon that terrified the German army, and it wasn't a machine gun or poison gas. It was a civilian hunting shotgun, the Winchester Model 1897, originally made for ducks and small game. So deadly in close combat that Germany officially demanded it be banned, calling it illegal and inhumane. In the tight, muddy trenches of France, one soldier could unleash 54 pellets in 2 seconds, clearing corridors that rifles and pistols couldn't touch. This is the story of the shotgun that turned ordinary men into legends. In 1918, the German government sent a formal diplomatic protest to the United States, demanding that one weapon be banned from the battlefield. They claimed it violated the laws of war and threatened to execute any American soldier caught carrying it. But this wasn't poison gas. It wasn't artillery. It wasn't some secret experimental weapon. It was a shotgun, a pump-action gun originally designed for hunting ducks. The irony was staggering. The same nation that unleashed chlorine gas, deployed flamethrowers, and armed soldiers with sawtooth bayonets was now demanding the prohibition of a hunting firearm. And they were deadly serious. So how did an ordinary hunting gun become so feared that an entire empire tried, and failed, to ban it? The Winchester Model 1897 was the creation of John Moses Browning, the legendary designer who would later craft the M1911 pistol and the Browning automatic rifle. Originally built for hunters chasing birds and small game, it belonged on farms and fields, not battlefields. The gun featured a tubular magazine holding 6 shells, each packed with 9.33 caliber buckshot pellets, roughly the size of a 9mm bullet. One squeeze of the trigger sent 9 projectiles flying at once. And that was only the beginning. Its true danger came from the fact that the Model 1897 had no trigger disconnector. Most modern shotguns require the shooter to release the trigger between each shot. The Winchester 1897 did not. Hold down the trigger and pump the action, and it fires instantly, every single time, a feature known as slam fire. A trained soldier could unload all 6 rounds in roughly 2 seconds, sending 54 lead pellets hurtling through the air almost simultaneously. Troops quickly learned to fire from the hip, pumping the action as fast as their arms could move, letting the recoil become part of the rhythm. Weighing just 8 pounds, about 3.5 kilograms, with an effective range of 20 to 30 meters, it might be limited in an open field, but in a narrow, 4-foot-wide trench, it was deadly. The Germans even gave it chilling nicknames, trench sweeper and trench broom, perfectly describing its brutal effect in confined spaces. Before we continue, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. A like helps this channel bring more stories like this to life. Now, back to 1917. The Winchester Model 1897 had already been around for 2 decades, sitting in gun shops and farmhouses across the United States. Millions of Americans used it to hunt birds. But how did a simple duck gun end up in the trenches of France? The answer begins with one man, General John Joseph Pershing, nicknamed Blackjack. Having commanded African-American cavalry units in the American West, by 1917 he was the most experienced combat leader in the U.S. Army, and he had not forgotten what shotguns could do during his time in the Philippines. In 1900, American forces faced the Moro people in the southern Philippine Islands. The Moro were fierce warriors, some practicing a ritual combat known as juramentado. They would bind their limbs tightly to slow bleeding, say their prayers, and then charge American positions armed with bladed weapons, determined to kill as many enemies as possible before dying. Standard rifles proved ineffective. A single soldier could take multiple bullet wounds and keep advancing. Army officers needed a weapon with immediate stopping power. They found it in the shotgun. A close-range blast of buckshot did what bullets could not. It ended the charge instantly. General Pershing witnessed this firsthand, taking careful note, a memory he would act on 16 years later. In 1916, Pershing led American forces into Mexico in pursuit of the revolutionary leader Pancho Villa. The campaign was grueling. Villa's men knew the terrain, ambushed U.S. troops, and vanished before a counterattack could land. When combat did erupt, it was fast and brutal, and once again, the shotgun proved its worth. Not for long-range battles, but for the sudden, chaotic moments when enemies appeared at close quarters. By April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany, and Pershing was placed in command of the American Expeditionary Forces, preparing to lead 2 million men to France. He had studied the battlefield reports, trench warfare, narrow corridors, hand-to-hand combat, nighttime raids, the very situations where shotguns had excelled before. Pershing wanted them deployed, but civilian hunting guns weren't ready for war. They needed modifications. In September 1917, a Georgia engineer named William G. Eager submitted a detailed proposal. Eager studied the problem and came up with a solution. Take commercial shotguns and transform them for the brutal realities of trench warfare. Add a ventilated metal handguard so soldiers could grip a searing hot barrel. Mount a bayonet for close combat when ammunition ran out. Shorten the barrel for easier maneuvering in tight spaces. The Army approved the plan, awarding contracts to both Winchester and Remington. The civilian Model 1897 was reborn as the Model 1897 trench gun. By June 1918, each division heading to France received just 50 shotguns. The number might seem small, but the Army had a strategy. Only specific men would wield them. Hunters back home, soldiers who could track and lead moving targets, men who could pump and fire instinctively. These specialists were called shotgunners, and they were sent into the narrow, deadly trenches of the Western Front. The Germans had been fighting for 4 years, facing machine guns, artillery, tanks, and poison gas, yet nothing had prepared them for what was about to arrive. A trench on the Western Front wasn't a traditional battlefield. It was a labyrinth. Narrow passages carved from mud and clay twisted and turned, some barely 4 feet wide, with blind corners, dead ends, and dugouts carved into the walls where soldiers slept and waited. Crossing open ground under relentless machine gun fire was one challenge. Once inside the enemy trench, everything changed. Rifles, built for accuracy at hundreds of meters, became cumbersome. In corridors where a soldier could touch both walls with outstretched arms, precision didn't matter, speed did. The Winchester Model 1897 was made for this environment. Its 20 to 30 meter effective range allowed it to reach enemies around corners, while the spread of buckshot filled every narrow passage, leaving almost no space to hide. A rifle bullet could miss. A pistol demanded perfect aim under intense stress. A shotgun blast, however, spread nearly a meter wide at 20 meters, in a 4-foot-wide trench. Missing was nearly impossible. Then there was the rate of fire. A bolt-action rifle required the shooter to work the bolt between each shot. Aim, fire, cycle, aim again. A trained soldier might manage 15 rounds per minute. A Winchester shotgunning expert could unleash 54 projectiles into a single trench section in just 2 seconds. The results were horrifying. One contemporary account describes German assault troops walking into a trap. The Americans held their fire until the enemy closed in, then unleashed a storm of buckshot. 200 men firing 6 rounds each, reloading, and firing again, left the front ranks piled atop one another, riddled with pellets. The Germans had a name for it: Teufelhund, devil dogs. Some historians debate whether the term originated at Belleau in June 1918, but the Marines fighting there were armed with Winchesters, and the Germans who faced them were terrified. The shotgunners developed tactics that seemed almost impossible. Many had been competitive trap shooters before the war, spending years tracking clay pigeons launched unpredictably through the air. Now, they applied those skills to combat. German soldiers hurled stick grenades with 5-second fuses, and these skilled marksmen could track a grenade in flight, aim, and blast it out of the air, sometimes sending it back toward enemy lines. The trench gun earned names like Sweeper and Broom, perfectly describing its role. The soldiers who carried them became lethal specialists, hunters navigating a maze of mud, and the German high command took notice. Long before Germany's famous diplomatic protest in 1918, alarm bells were already ringing. As early as December 1914, Germany had formally complained about American shotguns, 2 years before the U.S. even entered the war. Not a single American soldier had set foot in France, yet reports of the weapon's potential had reached European command, and they were already uneasy. Fear was building, but it was about to escalate into something far more urgent: desperation. Consider the timing: December 1914. The United States wouldn't declare war until April 1917, and large numbers of American troops wouldn't arrive in Europe until 1918. And yet, the Germans were already demanding the prohibition of a weapon they had never even faced firsthand. The Germans had already seen American shotguns in action, first in the Philippines, then in reports from Mexico. They understood, as Pershing did, the devastating potential of these weapons, and they wanted them banned before they ever reached European soil. Their complaints, however, went nowhere. America was still neutral. There was no battlefield to negotiate. Yet Germany's position was clear. Shotguns were barbaric, uncivilized, a blatant violation of the rules of warfare. The irony is staggering. By December 1914, Germany had already experimented with poison gas on the Eastern Front. Within months, they would unleash chlorine gas at Ypres, killing thousands. They were developing flamethrowers to burn men alive in their positions, and their standard-issue bayonets were designed with saw teeth to inflict wounds that could not be easily treated. But the shotgun, that was something else entirely. By the summer of 1918, American forces were fully engaged on the Western Front, and the shotguns had finally arrived. June 1918, below Wood, a forest destined to become legendary in Marine Corps history. The Germans held fortified positions among the trees, with machine gun nests and overlapping fields of fire. The French had already tried and failed to take it. Now, the Marines attacked, and some carried Winchester shotguns. The fighting in Below would rage for nearly a month. Close-quarters combat in dense forest was the perfect environment for the trench gun. The Germans fought fiercely. These were veteran soldiers who had held the ground for years. Yet something was different about these Americans. Reports reached German command. American shotgun teams were clearing positions that should have held. Soldiers who had survived years of French and British attacks were being overwhelmed in seconds. Buckshot tore through the undergrowth, striking multiple targets with a single blast. German soldiers quickly learned to make a grim calculation. If they saw a shotgunner approaching, they had two choices: fight and face 54 pellets in just 2 seconds, or surrender. Many chose the latter. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical one. They knew the sound of rifles, the roar of machine guns, the thunder of artillery, but the shotgun was different. Its boom was closer, heavier, more personal, signaling that someone was coming through the trench to kill at point-blank range. By September 1918, the tide of war was turning decisively against Germany. Their spring offensive had failed, and American troops were arriving faster than they could be stopped. The end was looming. Then, in a village somewhere on the Western Front, one American sergeant did what seemed impossible. His name was Fred Lloyd, and he carried a Winchester. The 100 Days Offensive was pushing forward, and the Western Front was beginning to collapse. Allied forces were pushing through villages and towns that had been under German control for 4 years. In one of these villages, a German garrison was holding its ground. The exact location and the number of soldiers are lost to history, but what happened next is legendary. Sergeant Fred Lloyd advanced alone, armed with a Winchester Model 1897. 6 shells in the magazine, pockets full of extra rounds. He moved down the village's main street. Not with a squad, not relying on covering fire from machine gun teams. He began clearing buildings on his own. Eyewitnesses described his method in 2 words: pump and fire. Approach a target, work the action, pull the trigger, repeat. The slam-fire rhythm echoed off stone walls, unstoppable. One man traversed an occupied village and emerged unscathed. Consider the enormity of that feat. A garrison of trained soldiers, armed with rifles and machine guns, hardened by 4 years of the deadliest war in history, simply could not stop him. And one American, armed with a single shotgun, walked through them. The Winchester gave him something no other weapon could: unmatched speed and devastating volume of fire. A rifle required careful aim for each shot. A pistol carried limited rounds. But a slam-firing shotgun could fill an entire room with lead before anyone inside had a chance to react. Fred Lloyd became a legend. His actions were reported up the chain of command and quickly spread among American units as proof of what the trench gun could achieve, and the Germans took notice as well. After the war, journalist Peter P. Carney sought to explain the shotgun's terrifying reputation. As editor of the National Sports Syndicate, Carney understood firearms and hunting better than most. He had witnessed the trench gun's transformation from humble sporting equipment into an instrument of pure terror. In his view, the shotgun was America's greatest contribution to the war, more decisive than fresh troops, more impactful than industrial production. The shotgun brought more fear to the enemy than any other weapon in the war. Peter P. Carney captured the German dread perfectly. The only umbrella that can protect anyone when the trench shotgun is raining pellets over the battlefield is an armored tank. An armored tank. That was the only thing that could make a soldier feel safe from a weapon originally designed to hunt ducks. By September 1918, German commanders had reached a breaking point. Their soldiers were terrified, defensive positions were being cleared with ruthless efficiency, and morale was crumbling. They decided to act. On September 19, 1918, the German government took the extraordinary step of sending a formal diplomatic protest through the Swiss embassy. They invoked international law, issued demands, and made a threat unprecedented in the war. They would execute any American prisoners caught with a shotgun. The document passed through official channels, Switzerland acting as the neutral intermediary, and arrived at the U.S. State Department. The Swiss carried messages between nations that were still trying to kill each other. The German protest was formal, precise, and entirely unprecedented. It invoked Article 23, Section E of the 1907 Hague Convention, which prohibited weapons designed to cause unnecessary suffering. Germany argued that shotguns fit this definition perfectly. Multiple projectiles tearing through flesh at once, wounds that were agonizing and often impossible to treat, suffering far beyond what was militarily necessary. The language of the protest was chilling. The German government condemned the use of shotguns by American forces and declared that any prisoner found with such a weapon or its ammunition would forfeit his life. Not imprisonment, not a tribunal, execution on the spot. The threat was absolute, and it left no room for negotiation. Any American soldier captured with a shotgun would be executed. Any soldier caught with shotgun shells in his pockets would face the same fate. No trial, no appeal. No other weapon in the entire war had ever provoked such a threat. Not machine guns that could mow down hundreds in minutes. Not artillery that obliterated entire battalions. Not poison gas that left men drowning in the fluid from their own lungs. Not flamethrowers that burned soldiers alive in their trenches. Only the shotgun. The protest even included a deadline. Germany demanded an American response by October 1, 1918, just 12 days. If the United States did not agree to remove shotguns from service, executions would begin. The reasoning was clear. Germany was losing the war, which could end in weeks or months, but they held hundreds of thousands of Allied prisoners. If they could force America to abandon the shotgun, they might secure at least one small victory before defeat. And behind that calculation, There lurked an even darker logic. German soldiers were surrendering at the mere sight of approaching shotgun teams. If captured Americans faced execution for carrying these weapons, perhaps the threat would make U.S. soldiers hesitate. Fear, it seemed, could cut both ways. The protest landed on the desk of Secretary of State Robert Lansing. A lawyer by training, precise and methodical, Lansing was not easily intimidated. He read Germany's demands and consulted military legal advisors. Brigadier General Samuel T. Ansel, acting Judge Advocate General of the Army, was tasked with drafting the official response. His job: determine whether American weapons violated international law. He studied the Hague Convention, examined the specifications of the Winchester, reviewed Germany's arguments, and began crafting a counterattack. The October 1st deadline loomed. The response had to be ready in days, and it could not be merely a refusal. It needed to be a message the world would never forget. Germany had threatened American lives. Now America was ready to respond. The U.S. reply arrived before the October 1st deadline. It was not an apology. It was not a negotiation. It was a methodical dismantling of Germany's argument. Brigadier General Samuel T. Ansel laid out the case with precision. The Hague Convention prohibited weapons that caused unnecessary suffering. The key word was unnecessary. All weapons inflict suffering. The question was whether that suffering served a legitimate military purpose. Ansel argued that shotgun wounds were no different, in principle, from injuries caused by other accepted weapons. Artillery shrapnel tore multiple wound channels. Machine gun fire could strike a soldier dozens of times in seconds. If multiple projectiles alone made a weapon illegal, half the arsenal on the Western Front would be banned. But the American response did not stop at legal nuance. Secretary Lansing authorized a direct counterattack in words. If Germany wanted to lecture on unnecessary suffering, America. Germany had first unleashed poison gas at Ypres in April 1915. Men choked on their own fluids, and survivors were left with permanent lung damage. Germany had signed the Hague Convention, then deliberately released death into the wind. Phosgene, even deadlier than chlorine, was nearly odorless. By the time soldiers realized they had been exposed, it was too late. They drowned from the inside. Flamethrowers. Since 1915, German flame units had burned men alive in their trenches, screams echoing for hundreds of meters. Sawtooth bayonets, standard issue, were designed to inflict wounds that could not be stitched closed, maximizing bleeding and suffering. The American message was clear: you lecture us about a hunting shotgun while your own soldiers wield weapons built for cruelty. The argument is over. Then came the warning. If Germany executed a single American prisoner for carrying a shotgun, the United States would retaliate. The specifics were deliberately left unsaid. They did not need to be. Germany had American prisoners, and they now understood exactly what that meant. America held German prisoners, and the calculus of vengeance was simple. Germany blinked. Not a single American soldier was executed for carrying a shotgun. Not one. The threat vanished. The protest faded into history. 44 days later, the war ended. November 11th, 1918. The guns fell silent, but the Winchester Model 1897 was far from finished. 23 years later, in December 1941, America was at war again. In the Pacific, from Guadalcanal to the island-hopping campaigns of Eniwetok and Okinawa, Marines faced dense jungles, bunkers, caves, and tunnels, the exact environment where a shotgun excelled. They remembered what their fathers had carried and demanded Winchester trench guns, even going so far as to requisition them from Navy ships before amphibious landings. In 1942, Major General Alexander Patch led an attack personally, not with a pistol, not with a carbine, but with a Winchester shotgun in hand. A general in the jungle wielding what had once been a simple duck gun. On August 17, 1942, Sergeant Clyde Thomason used his Winchester to storm Japanese positions on Munda Island. becoming one of the first American heroes of the Pacific War. The very weapon Germany had tried to ban continued to shape battlefields a generation later. The Winchester Model 1897 remained in American military service for nearly a century. From the Philippine insurrection in 1900 to the jungles of Vietnam in the 1960s, and in some units even into the 1990s, this shotgun saw almost continuous service. Nearly 1 million Model 1897s were manufactured between 1897 and 1957, and by the end of World War II, the U.S. military had purchased roughly 500,000 shotguns of all types. The weapon that Germany once sought to outlaw became standard issue. Marines even developed a ritual. Before amphibious landings, they would raid Navy armories to get their hands on shotguns. Official channels be damned. They knew what worked. Marines took what they needed. Officers looked the other way. Everyone understood what waited on those beaches. Korea, Vietnam. The shotgun followed American soldiers into every conflict. Tactics evolved, missions changed, but the principle remained the same. When fighting got close, when corridors were narrow, when darkness hid the enemy, nothing cleared a space like a 12-gauge loaded with buckshot. And the German protest? It became a dark joke, a footnote whispered among soldiers in foxholes and bunkers. The nation that pioneered chemical warfare complained about a duck gun. The army that burned men alive thought buckshot was too cruel. Pause and consider that. In 4 years of industrial slaughter, the weapon that struck terror into Germany was not the tank, not the airplane, not the submarine. It was a pump-action shotgun designed by John Browning for American hunters. 54 pellets in 2 seconds. Enough to provoke a formal diplomatic protest, enough to trigger execution threats, enough to make hardened soldiers surrender rather than fight. The Winchester Model 1897 is no longer in active military service. Modern combat shotguns have taken its place, but the principles remain the same. The psychology remains the same. When soldiers need to clear a room, they still reach for a shotgun. And somewhere in that lineage lies a September day in 1918, a formal document moving through Swiss diplomatic channels, a threat of execution, an American refusal, and 44 days later, silence on the Western Front. John Browning designed his shotgun for hunting birds. He could not have imagined what it would become. He could not have predicted that his duck gun would terrify a generation of German soldiers, prompt the only execution threat of the entire war, or continue to claim targets 50 years after his death. The trench sweeper, the trench broom, the devil's weapon. Simply put, the shotgun. If this story grabbed your attention, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to share this video with more history lovers like you. Make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from right now? And here's a question for you. What other primitive weapons should we cover next? Bows in medieval warfare? Bayonets? Knives? Let us know. These stories deserve to be remembered, and your voice helps keep them alive. Thanks for watching.